I know what you're all wondering. And the answer is yes. I will teach you today the secret of happiness. We will all ascend into heaven during my talk. Well, we'll see. As the facilitator of an adult VUU religious education program titled The Dalai Lama and Friends, which reads and discusses Tibetan and Buddhist ideas, I was asked back in 2010 if the group would lead a VUU service. And that went well. So when I was asked a while back if I might again head up service, I agreed. The actual topic was needed pretty quickly to make it into the June newsletter. Somehow I blurted out happiness, because that's something we talk about a lot in that group. And so that got printed, and then I was faced with the reality of actually doing this, knowing full well that I'm not really the most appropriate person to get up and say something about it. My nickname has often been Mr. Serious. Seriously. But let me share a little of what I've learned about this over the last few years. First of all, I know that everyone in this room wants to be happy and wants to avoid suffering. It's a universal fact of life, and if it isn't true about you, then I would say you aren't alive. Every grasshopper and bird and every single-celled organism tries to move towards what makes it feel good and away from what makes it suffer. And even when we crazy humans intentionally do things that cause us pain or suffering, we do so because we have an ulterior motive, right? We must want something out of the deal in the end. For instance, I have intentionally punched a kitchen cabinet door after that door smashed my finger because my mind was unhappy and wanted somehow to make things right. However ineffective and perhaps even temporarily insane my methodology. Even persons who give up their lives in support of others or a cause, I would suggest even those who commit suicide, have the root of their actions in their desire to be happy, and they just feel they can't find happiness in the other way. We all just want to be happy. Well, what is happiness anyway? In recent years, scientists have broken their taboo about studying it and have begun exploring questions like where does it come from and who has more of it. They've even rated countries against each other on scales of their HQ, their happiness quotient. And one claim is that we can't even reliably trust that when we think we're happy, we really are. It turns out that when we're happy, scientists can detect changes in our heart rate and blood pressure, even in the pupils of our eyes. Scientists can measure improved immune system responses, circulation, and even athletic performance enhancements. So we might ask, well, how can we even know if we're happy? We know it's very possible for us to gloss over our true state, covering up an anxious spirit with a veneer of laughter and other behaviors that give the appearance of being all happy. We can fool others, and we can even fool ourselves. Okay, but wait, we're Americans, right? We're supposed to know all about the pursuit of happiness. We should be experts on this topic. It's in one of our foundational documents. Well, both our knowledge and experience of American culture, with its relatively high levels of violence and suicide and depression, and also those scientific studies, suggest that we in the US aren't sitting anywhere near the top of the happiness heap. We have a problem, Houston. Here's something about happiness that I find intriguing and just a little bit scary. We have evidence that people have a baseline level of happiness. So for instance, a generally unhappy person who wins the lottery, after the initial weeks or months of elation have passed, will eventually find their way back to their original grumpiness. It's true. And most of us know people who always seem to be happy. And that includes bouncing back to their baseline happiness level, even after suffering great loss. There's a loss of a loved one. It's kind of like our waist. We try to lose some weight, but it just keeps returning back to the level it was at before we started dieting. So where does that leave us? Can we find happiness? Am I stuck with my baseline happiness level? I've been a student of Zen Buddhism for over 20 years, pushing 30 years. And about 5 years ago, I picked up a book that my wife had laying around the house called The Art of Happiness. On the cover was a picture of the Dalai Lama, of course. And for someone as serious as me, I recall thinking that his big grin was not very Buddhist. He was a bit over the top for my Zen sensibilities. But as I flipped through the pages of this book, something grabbed me. First, the Dalai Lama responded when asked if he was happy with a sincere yes. Something about the way he answered that question was new to me. It was so direct. Prior to that point in my life, the idea of walking around saying that you're happy was just not something one did. Yet, he presented the idea with such a simple, unconceited honesty. Here was an old man who had lost his country, his position, was witnessing China slowly destroy his culture for more than 50 years now, and he wasn't bitter. On the whole, he seems really, really happy. As I read more, it was apparent that this wasn't a fake happiness or a denial of the pain of life. The Dalai Lama shares how deeply he feels the losses that he has endured in his life, and his heart wells up with compassion for the suffering of the Tibetan people. In fact, for all people who suffer, as you learn, as you read more from him. But through everything, his spirit remains buoyant, impish, childlike. He laughs a lot. The Dalai Lama claims he wasn't always this way. And he says, and this point is what grabbed me most, that happiness is the purpose of our life. It is our spiritual, religious goal. Prior to that, deep down, I pretty much equated pursuing happiness with greed and selfishness, which ran just about opposite to any religious goals. It wasn't long before I was reading everything I could get my hands on by this imp. And the more that I read, the more something started to open up and change inside of me. Yes, me, the Grinch. My heart has grown a few sizes, I think. Let me just say right now, I don't want to trivialize Buddhism. Buddhism is a rich tradition with a long and varied history. It's more than just about happiness. That's just the part we're discussing right now. And it is in any case quite correct to say that a central goal of Tibetan Buddhism is, quote, a state of genuine well-being. That's a quote from Buddhism with an Attitude by E. Alan Wallace, who is a scholar, and who lived as a monk also for about 14 years. According to him, the whole point is a kind of deep, honest happiness with life. Well, how cool is that? So it won't surprise you to hear me say that I think we can learn a thing or two from this Dalai Lama guy. His form of Buddhism contains a concept called mind training. But the use of the word mind here encompasses not only the brain, the thinking self, but also the heart, the feeling self. So it's pretty much like attitude training. It's for the whole invisible thing we call a person. And it is seen by Tibetan Buddhists as the path to happiness. However, and this is critical, in Tibetan mind training, instead of moving towards selfish goals, pleasure and gain and so forth, pretty much the American dream stuff, one trains in going the opposite way. One trains in altruism, in compassion, in focusing on alleviating the suffering of others, and on helping others be happy all day long. Now, this is no small task. In case you haven't noticed, nanosecond by nanosecond, our minds are subconsciously steering us back towards selfish goals. Even when attempting altruism, it's trying to do this. Our little ego is in a constant state of craving for more pleasure, more comfort, anything that makes us feel better. But in mind training, instead of constantly watching that movie inside of our heads, you know, the one with me in the starring role, instead we begin to focus outwards, to feel connected to the world. A sustained focus on the happiness of others, while a tricky project, begins a fantastic release from what I would call the prison of self-importance. Please understand that this isn't just about realizing the truth of this idea. This involves practicing to develop new mental habits. In so doing, we naturally begin to love more often and more honestly, and with less and less regard to what we get out of the deal. Love and compassion become natural. Connectedness becomes a norm. A little surprisingly, it also results in having generally less fear and anxiety about life and death. Steadily working on opening up my heart, instead of trying to cherish and protect myself, peels away layer after layer of psychological insulation. It feels honestly good. The Dalai Lama calls working on this wise selfishness. Happiness is our birthright, but to claim it, we must first look deeply and be honest enough to recognize how much of what we do is based on selfishness, based on self-absorption. And then we must diligently work to replace that with a focus on love and compassion. It doesn't do any good to have seeds if you don't water them. So the Dalai Lama would argue that the obstacles to our happiness are not outside of us. Our internal fears and our anger and our jealousy and so forth are our true enemies. An insult or for that matter, a kitchen cabinet door, may cause me pain. But suffering, in the Buddhist sense, is the result of my own internal reaction to the problems of the world. It is my own attachment to myself and wanting things to go my way that causes my suffering. And sometimes we're proud of that suffering. We might wear it like a badge. Giving it up requires a different kind of humility. If done gently, lightly, and without a big load of self-criticism, I can attest to this process being absolutely liberating. You can do this yourself anytime. Real easy. You don't have to be a Buddhist to get value from this stuff. Let's try a little experiment. Right now, I want you to pretend in your mind that you just don't care anything for yourself and what's going on with you. Just turn that off for a second. Your sole thought is you want everyone else in this room to be happy. That's what you want more than anything else in the world. Please take a few moments to get into this mindset. Just think right now only of wanting everyone in this room to be truly happy. That's all. Some of us may have difficulty getting in touch with that. I mean, just get in your car and drive out of the parking lot, and you'll realize that's not the normal way we relate to the world. But if you were able to feel that warm connectedness, I'm guessing it was a pretty good feeling. I am not the world's most lovable person, nor the most loving person, but I can feel it. What would happen if you did that 10 or 15 second exercise 10 times every day? That's just a couple of minutes. What would happen, do you think? I think you know what would happen. And I'd like to suggest you consider it. That's my suggestion to you from what I've learned. Practice love as often as you can. Practice it. It's very simple. May you be happy.